excited to hear from the artists that we have here today. They need no introduction. It would also take a while for me to tell you how accomplished they all are. But we are very, very excited to have Mr. Krishna, Ms. Akkarai Subhalakshmi, and Mr. Praveen Sparsh here today at Georgia Tech for a lecture demonstration on Raga Music Its Essence. Before we get started, I ask that you please switch off your phones if possible, definitely silence them. Please also remain seated during pieces. Please also don't take any audio or video recordings or any photographs with flash. But with that, I will give the stage to the artist. Please give them a warm welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Before I start the leg dem, I'm just going to present a small piece and then we will take it from there.
गिरिराजसुते करुणा कलिते पाहि श्री गिरिराजसुते करुणा कलिते पाहि श्री गिरिराजसुते करुणा kalita pahi Shri Girirajasute Karuna kalita pahi Shri Girirajasute Karuna kalita pada saroja manusaramite sabash amba pahi Shri Girirajasute karuna kalite pada saroja manusaramite amba pahi Shri Girirajasute karuna kalite pada saroja manusaramite Teranupama gatinge kambrapati sudati sati dehi mate dehi mate ranupama gatinge kambrapati sudati sati dehi mate ranupama gatinge kamrapati sudati sati tejasa tulita divyamurte lalite ati lalite dehi mate ranupama gatinge kamrapati sudati sati tejasa tulita divyamurte lalite ati lalite samagari sani sagagama samagari sani sagagama parama pagama gari sani samagari sani sagagama parama pagama gari sani sagagama gama baba dama pagama gari samagari sagama pama pa sani samagari gari ni sani daba daba ma pama gama gari gama pama gari sani pa hi Shri Girirajasute karuna kalite pada saroja manusaramite amba Devi Purani Nigama Vinute Dehi Purani Nigama Vinute Priti Riha Vasatute Manadenu Dinamajite Devi Purani Nigama Vinute Priti Riha Vasatute Manadenu Dinamajite Yudhijitendra Vimate Amba Devadi Ratakritanute Kamakoti Pitagate Dina ಅಂಬದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ಅಂಬದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ಅಂಬದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ಅಂಬದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ಯೂಹಿ ಪರದೇವತೆ ಸುಚರಿತೆ ಸಮಗಾರಿ ಸನಿ ಸಗಮ ಪದಮ ಪಗಮ ಗರಿ ಸನಿ ನೀ ಸನಿ ಸಗಗ ಗಮ ಬಬ ದಮ ಪಗಮ ಗರಿ ಸ ಸಮಗಾರಿ ಸಗಮ ಪಮ ಪ ಸನಿ ಸಮಗರಿ ಗ ಗರಿ ನಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ದಪ ಮ ಪ ಮ ಗ ಗಮ ಗರಿ ಗಮ ಪ ಮ ಗರಿ ಸನಿ ಪ ಹಿ ಶ್ರೀ ಗಿರಿರಾಜ ಸುತೆ ಅಂಬದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ಅಂಬದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ಅಂಬದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ಅಂಬದೀನ ಜನನಿ ಜಕರೆ ದೇವತೆ ದೀನ ಜನ ನಿಜ ಕರೆ ಯೂಹಿ ಪರದೇವತೆ ಪರದೇವತೆ ಭುವಿ ಪರದೇವತೆ ಸುಚರಿತ ದೀನ ಜನ ನಿಜ ಕರೆ ಯುವಿ ಪರದೇವತೆ ಸುಚರಿತ ದೀನ ಜನ ನಿಜ ದೀನ ಜನ ನಿಜ ಕರೆ ಭುವಿ ಪರದೇವತೆ ದೇವತೆ ದೇವತೆ ದೀನ ಭುವಿ ಪರದೇವತೆ ಸುಚರಿತೆ ಸಮಗಾರಿ ಸನಿ ಸಗಮ ಪದಮ ಪಗಮ ಗರಿ ಸನಿ ನೀ ಸನಿ ಸಗಮ ಗಮ ಪಬ ಮಪ ಗಮ ಗರಿ ಸ ಸಮಗಾರಿ ಸಗಮ ಪಮ ಪ ಸನಿ ಸಮಗರಿ ಗ ಗರಿ ನಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ದಪ ಮಪ ಮಗ ಗಮ ಗರಿ ಗಮ ಪಮ ಗರಿ ಸನಿ ಪ ಗರಿ ನಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ದಪ ಮಪ ಮಗ ಗಮ ಗರಿ ಗಮ ಪಮ ಗರಿ ಸನಿ ಗರಿ ನಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ದಪ ಮ ಗಮ ಪದ ಪ ಸನಿ ಗರಿ ನಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ದಪ ಮಪ ಮಗ ಗಮ ಗರಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ನಿ ದ ಗಮ ಗರಿ ಸರಿ ನಿ ಸ ಮ ಗಮ ಪದ ಪ ಗರಿ ನಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ದಪ ಮ ಸಮಗ ಮಗರಿ ಸಮಗರಿ ನಿ ಮಗರಿ ಸನಿ ಸಗರಿ ಗನಿ ಸಮ ಮಗರಿ ನಿ ಗರಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ದಪ ಮಪ ಮಗ ಗಮ ಮಗ ಮಪ ಮಪ ದಪ ದ ಸನಿ ಸಗರಿ ಗಮ ಗಮ ಗರಿ ಸನಿ ಸಗ ಮಗರಿ ನಿ ಸನಿ ದಪ ದಪ ಮಪ ಮಗ ಗಮ ಗರಿ ಗಮ ಪ ಮಗರಿ ಸನಿ sute karuna kalite pada saroja ranu saramite Baba hi Shri Giriraj sute karuna kalite pada saroja manusaramite Bale.
So let's start with what we just did, and then we'll rewind back a bit. So the topic of today's discussion is looking at what is fundamentally the core of 2-3 forms of music in India. Definitely Carnatic music, Khayal, Dhrupad, where you could call it raga music. But we have to be careful when we use this word, because the idea of the raga travels beyond the frontiers of these limitations. So you can expand the idea as being existent beyond these forms. It is existent, to be very, very clean. And it is not one coming from another, or some taken from another and made better. All this is just mumbo-jumbo, classist nonsense. So first throw that out of the window before we begin this session today. But what I'm going to talk about today is the idea of the raga within the paradigm called Carnatic music. Okay? It's with that specificity that I'm having this discussion. Because once you travel beyond the specificity, there are other elements that come into being, other contexts, other cultural contexts, intentionality, reason for the art forms to exist, who's performing the art form, so many other complicated conversations need to be had. And some of them even I should not be having. So it would be pretty appropriating for myself for having that conversation on behalf of somebody else. So I will not risk doing that. So the reason I'm having this discussion is because we take this for so much for granted. The honest truth is we know very little about it. Everybody knows the word raga. Everybody thinks they know the raga. Everybody responds to the raga. But beyond definitions in books, which are usually pretty boring, if you ask ourselves, what does it mean by this is a raga? You know, when I say raga, I mean, there are great musicians who have said raga is India's contribution to world music. Well, take that with a pinch of salt, but it is an interesting statement to make and something that I think can be critically looked at. Because the concept of what I would call an abstract melodic bass is not unique of India. The maqam is in many ways something very close to what you would call a raga. Though maqam has been reconstructed post the Ottoman period, that's a different story altogether. Even if you take that into consideration, the maqam has elements that can be very much compared to what we call a raga within a different paradigm of even tonal understandings. But the reason I'm asking this question is because as a student of music, I always seemed to think I knew what it was. I mean, from the time I learned the first line, I'm told this is Malava Gaula Raga. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean it's a set of notes? Does it mean it's notes with some shaking happening here and there? Does it mean it evokes one sentiment? Does it mean it is limited by a certain time frame? What are these associations? So there are two parts, right? What is the constructionality of it? And what are the associations we make with it, right? And I think we have to look at both these elements, and also in terms of being musicians, what do we do with it? Do we really do something with it? Because again, we use this word manodharma, like we are some magicians pulling some hat trick out of a, So we'll be very careful with these things, because dazzling things are not necessarily so magical. So what is it that I learn from a raga, or what is it I gather from the raga, and what is it am I doing? Now, if I take what I sang today, which is Ananda Bhairavi, this was, my alapana was not the traditional Ananda Bhairavi alapana. Starting from the first phrase. I'll probably use that kind of an anchor. I don't remember what I sang, but I'll try and use it as an anchor to have this conversation. Because there were a lot of elements that was still Ananda Bhairavi to you, but constructionally was not Ananda Bhairavi. So that's also an interesting thing to look at. How was it still Ananda Bhairavi for you when it was not constructionally not Ananda Bhairavi? So what am I doing here for you to still feel Ananda Bhairavi, right? So these are all interesting spaces to explore, which I hope we can do to some extent. This is a very large topic. This is a 2-day seminar. But we will try and touch upon a few things. The first thing, couple of things I want to say is certain words we use need to be clarified. And then I'll go into the history of the raga a bit. There are words, we use the word Swara, and we use the word Swarasthana, and then we use the word gamaka. So these 3 words need some clarity before I proceed. In my opinion, the word Swara has been very wrongly used continuously through a long period of time, and I'll explain why. So how we are told to understand the Swara is note. So, easier for you to play than me to sing. 12 vaasiru. Or just play any 7, no? Just play any 7, doesn't matter. Any 7, anything. Doesn't matter. கொஞ்சம் கமக்கம் பாடலான்னா அப்படி கொஞ்சம் கமக்கம் பாடுறத கூடிய அதில் ஒன்றுமே பண்ண முடியாதுண்ணா அப்படியே தான் பாடணும். அப்பா Okay, so what we are told is that these are swaras. Sa re ga ma pa da ni sa sa ni da pa ma ga re sa. Then we are told on this we apply this thing called gamaka. So the first thing we need to do is completely demolish this very wrong idea. Gamaka is not an application on a position. This is a very wrong conception that we have all digested. And I'll explain why. Swara is a bandwidth of ideas of a certain positionality. So, ma, the non-moving position ma is one possibility of that ma. Ma, ma, ma is all that swara. So it is not like ma, I'm applying gamaka and making ma. No. The reason I say this, only if you change this mindset will you understand raga. If you don't change this mindset, you will not understand raga. And we have all been trained to think like this. So gamaka is not an application, it's an intrinsic quality, intrinsic aspect of what we call a swara. If there is no gamaka, there is no swara. If there is a position without that oscillation, or whatever you want to call that, that's one possibility of that position. This is how you must think of a swara. So, sa re ga 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 ga, all are part of that ga in this context. I'll come to the context later. Okay? So, you have to understand the swara as a set of possibilities around a position. Now, then you can ask the question, what is that position called? That position is called a swarasthana. So, that position of, so in other words, the swara which does not move is a swarasthana, and that is one possibility in the bandwidth of possibilities that there are in a swara. There's slightly more complicated way of understanding a swara, but it's essential we do it this way. Because then you don't understand the raga at all. So if I say ma ga ma ga ma ga ma ga ma ga is all part of one idea of ma. That idea of ma is the swara, and the gamaka is part of that idea. This is a more abstract way of understanding a swara. And a swarasthana is that one place in it where it does not move. How much it moves, to what extent it moves, we'll come to. So I want to first change this understanding. It's essential that all of us change this understanding, because if you don't change it, the way you sing a raga, the way you think of a raga, the way you push a raga is limited. The way you receive a raga is also limited. Right? This is a more complex way, but it's the best way to do it. Now I'm going to stop here and rewind a bit. So where did this idea of raga come from? If I'm not going to really go to the first time that the word raga appears in musicology, because its appearance in that context when it was called a grama raga is an entirely different musical system. Its ancient musical system has no connection to what we call a raga today. But the first time you find the word raga appear in any musicological text is when it appears in the idea called a grama raga. This is part of ancient music, and anybody who tells you that this is connected to that, they don't know what they're talking about. Because there is no connection between ancient music written in either Sangita Ratnakara or written in the Bharatanaट्य Shastra or written in the Manosollasa or written in any of these treatises to what we call Carnatic music today or Khayal today or Dhrupad today. There's no connection. We like to make connections. We are Indians. Carnatic music in its practice, I'm being careful here, in its practice, don't take any of the dates I give you absolutely, there's flexibility there, is about 300 years old in its practice. In a musicological sense, how old is the idea of the raga? Tough one to do. But I will say about 500. And there's a reason why I'm saying about 500. It is around that period that you have an entire set of texts beginning to classify the idea of the raga. Okay? About 1500s, I think 1480s maybe the first earliest, what we call the Mela period. And it's important we understand this history to a certain extent to understand the problems of our concept of ragas and our issues with how we associate with it. I'm not going to go to the nuts and bolts, but let me just give you an overview of what happened. Now, first, how did ragas happen? That's one of those magical questions, right? Did just people come up with it? So what seems to have happened is, at least in the initial years, after a lot of changes, these early musical texts were clearly documenting ragas that were in practice. Okay? So musicologists, theoreticians, were looking at what was in practice and giving it an organized form of understanding. As a species, we like to bracket things into boxes. We like to categorize things. We've done that across the globe. And this is another way of categorizing things, because we believe comprehension is better, but that's, of course, debatable. But we do it automatically, right? So what they basically did is they saw the ragas in practice. Now, how did these ragas come about? Now, this is where it's interesting to think about it. It seems as if these ragas were not structured by three people sitting in a room who said, no, let's pick up these notes, let's put this. No. What seems to have happened is people have spotted connecting melodic lines or found ways in which melodic lines connect and found commonalities in these connections and then put them together. An analogy that I often give is, could be an English song, could be a Hindi film song. Sometimes you listen to 5 songs, an English song, and you say, hey, these 4 songs sound similar. Now, how do we do that? We don't know any note maybe, we just hear it. So there is something in the melodic pattern or in the phrase that rings a bell. In the case of Western music, it could be even harmonies, but just keep harmony away for now. Just think of it as a melodic line. It seems as if people did that. They saw different phrases of music, of tunes, and found a way to bring them together. Now, when they bonded them together, they found something that kept them together. What keeps them together, we'll come to. And this coming together was given an identification marker, and that was raga name X or Y. That's it. It was post facto that you theorize it and say, okay, this is together, so what are the rules by which this is together? Right? Or what seems to be the reason why it's together? You find some reasoning, you find some logic, you find some networking that seems to make sense. And you obviously probably also throw away things that you believe don't network well there. Most likely that also happened, right? So these bundles of melodic ideas became ragas. Now, when people want to categorize the ragas, they came up with a very basic problem. On what basis do I categorize them? So then they went back to the idea saying, let's categorize them on the basis of what the swarasthanas are. Or what notes. I'm using the word swarasthana specifically. The fixed note positions, which we call swara. Sthana means position. Swara is a note. So what they said is, okay, very simple. A bunch of ragas that have, for example, what she played. Sa re ga ma pa da ni sa sa ni da pa ma ga, are all in one bundle. It was a basket. Mela means basically coming together. That's all it means. Okay? This is a very simple logic. They also said they can be together, but there's no conditionality that every raga in that bundle has to have all the 7 notes. There's no rule. Very smart and very flexible operation, actually. So they basically came up with an X number of bundles, and they called each bundle a mela. Okay, I'm not going to go to 18 melas or 15 melas. There's a whole history to it. I'm not going there. 15, 18, 19, all these numbers are not really relevant. Now, but they came up with a problem. Okay, fine, I can't call it mela A and B. I have to call it by something. So what do I call it by now? And they came up with the simplest answer, the most populist answer, saying the most popular raga among the gang will be the title holder for that group. Very simple. So they say mela A is called Bhupalam because Bhupalam is very famous. Simple. So it was actually a very simple operation, right? But human beings are human beings, right? They don't think that this is enough. They have to keep doing something to it, right? I mean, you guys are in Georgia Tech, so you know. So, anyway. So, what happened was, then this starts progressing. There are 2-3 things that start changing. So, one is, they say, no, it's not enough if the title holder is famous. The title holder must also have all the 7 notes. So that's the next stage of development. So it's not important if he's popular. He's popular and has 7 notes. Now, be very careful here. When they said 7 notes, they just means existence of 7 notes. I am still not talking about scale. I'm not still talking about the ordering of them. Nobody cared a damn about it. They just said the 7 notes must be there. So if I sing the raga, somewhere I must find sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, somewhere. For example, Ananda Bhairavi will be Sampurnam. We'll have 7 notes. Ga, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ba, ni, da, pa, ma. It has all the 7 notes. Some variety of the 7. Right? This was also interesting operation. They said, okay, title holder needs 2 qualifications. Now, as things progressed, another thing started happening. Then there was this very important personality called Venkatamakin who appears on the scene. Actually, even before him, there were other people. So I'll tell you what happens there. Again, I'm being reductionist in explaining this to you because it's a bit complicated. Now, how many notes are there in an octave was being debated right through this period. There were many people giving different valuations. So, and the moment you say there could be 12 swarasthanas, you say there may be 16, maybe 14, whatever number you call it. Then the human brain is saying, you know what, if I know this number, I can just construct things, boss. Right? You can, right? So suddenly there's a shift in thought. They're saying, it's not about what the ragas are in practice anymore. Let me be smarter than that. I'll create poetry. So people start doing this arithmetical calculations of saying, how many can I generate? So there was one person, Somanatha, generates 960 because the number of positions he had were so many. And he did the multiplication accordingly and he said permutation, combination, 960 melas. So each one started coming up with a number. I'm not going chronologically, I'm just giving you different patches of information in that 500 period. So don't call me out and saying, no, that happened before this. It probably did and I'll concede now. So this is a parallel track happening. So here you have the name being given a title holder, then you're saying it must have 7 notes. Parallelly you're saying you could have, mathematically you could have so many. So theoreticians are becoming a dominant player in this. That's when things get very problematic, right? So then there is this very important theoretician called Venkatamakin who appears on the scene. Now, he comes up with probably the most elegant way of postulating how many ragas can be in a mela system. Most elegant. Because his constant variable system is simple and beautiful. Very simple. So he uses the 4th note ma as a constant for the first set and as a higher pitch constant for the second set. And between every group, he makes 2 variables continuously changing. It's a very smart, very elegant play. But he does something very nice, and you have to give him a lot of credit. He creates a 72 classification system. That is, there are 72 baskets, possible baskets, which means there are 72 possible set of swarasthanas. Not ragas, not swaras, swarasthanas. Okay? But he realizes one thing. He says, I may have created this system, but the ragas in practice do not fill this entire chart. You get what I'm saying? Because there are no ragas in some of those categories. It's his own construction. So what he does smartly, he just leaves those open. He says this is a 72 system, but there are only ragas in these numbers. In Mela number 12 there is, in Mela number 20 there are ragas, Mela number 28 there are ragas. There could be another number, for example, I don't remember, I'm just arbitrarily giving you a number now, maybe 63. There are no ragas, therefore it's an empty box. But he makes one mistake. The cardinal mistake, according to me, that he makes, he gives people that little hook and says, I will show you how you can make one. Now that's the problem. Till now he's fine. He's like saying, guys, this is just a theoretical possibility. It's not a creative possibility because raga, like I said, is an organic being that comes from musical movement and not from positional construction of scales. But suddenly he says, I get the smart guy in him suddenly comes to play, maybe I'll just throw one in. And he throws one in. Deshi Simharavam, what we call Hemavati today. And he creates what I would call a synthetic raga. And I'm saying it's synthetic because it is not an organically created thing. It is an artificially constructed set of notes in a certain order. Now, whether it can become a raga is, of course, an interesting debate. The moment he does this, he's opened the floodgates. You do one, I'll do the rest. I'm smarter. So his descendant, Muddu Venkatamakin, says, what has this guy done? He's done one. Let's finish the entire chart. He finishes the entire chart. Now, there are 2 things to keep in mind even at this stage of raga development. Point 1, the title holder still has 7 notes, period. Could be in any capacity. Point 2 is they never describe a raga according to its scale. Never. If you look at old treatises, even before Venkatamakin, or even that around that period, if they say raga X, say Ramakriya, there'll be a bunch of phrases given to you. It's descriptive. The whole idea is raga is a descriptive idea, not a prescriptive notion. Right? So they still don't tell you ascending this way, descend. Nobody tells you that. So I think these are very important for us to understand on what a raga is. Because you don't understand this movement, you don't see maybe what changes have happened, how our perceptions have been changed because of that. So Venkatamakin does this. Then there are 2 more shifts that happen. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you one more thing. When a mela is given, ragas are assigned to a certain mela, all the melas are equal to each other. So if there's a basket of 20 ragas in mela 23, all 23 are equal. The title holder is not special. He's just a name. The title holder is equal to every other one below. Nobody is saying the rest have come from the title holder. Please remember that. Nobody is saying that's the father or the mother from whom these are born. This nonsense is not happening. And it's important to recognize that, because that nonsense has given us this idea of oldness which is completely twisted. Many times, the ragas in the basket are older than the title holder. So which is why I say never learn this system. Just learn the ragas, you'll learn them better. So now what happens is now these things start shifting. And you must understand the dominance of the theoretician here. So now they say, the next part they say is, okay, there are 2-3 things that happen. One they say is, the title holder cannot, this is another system that evolves from a mysterious person called Govinda. Nobody knows who he is. There's no historical document on him. There is this one book called the Sangraha Chudamani that appears suddenly, and this name appears. And honestly, historically, there is no reference to who this Govinda is. He's one of these mysterious figures. He comes up with this thing called the Sangraha Chudamani. Now there, suddenly he says, it's not enough if it's 7 notes. The 7 notes have to be in linear order now. Sa re ga ma pa da ni sa ni da pa. Only if it is in linear order can it hold the name title holder for the mela. You just see how we are getting to the lowest common denominator so fast. You can see it. And you're most welcome to cross-refer anything I have said with all the treatises. You're most welcome to do so. So now there's another shift that is happening. Along with that, this idea of the scale starts becoming dominant. This idea of ascending and descending. Now, what did it actually mean? The old word, the ancient word is murchana, used in a different concept. Again, I'm going to say it's used in a different concept. But even in a modern treatise called the Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini, written in 1904, the word murchana appears. Now, murchana does not mean every time I go up, I must go like this. Every time I come down, I go. No. All they're telling you is something simple. The probability, the most common possibility of an ascent from A to B is this. The most common or the most picturesque descent is like this. It's just a way of telling you we can go like this, we can come like this. But you look at the raga many times, under that, it's completely different from this. Because the possibility is much more. But this is just a route map. There are in cases the route map doesn't tally. That also happens. Does not tally at all. So suddenly we start getting attached with this notion of a scale. Then the scale becomes a determinant of the raga. Never happened before. That's when your problem of gamaka comes. Once you say scale is a raga, you apply gamaka on a scale, then it becomes a raga. You apply gamaka on a scale, then manipulate the swara position, go up and down 3-4 times, it becomes a raga. You see what's happening here? That's our conceptual notion today, in some manner, in a very simplistic manner. And that's what we teach children. That's what we teach, why children? Most professionals talk in that manner today. So, there's another thing, one term, unnecessary term called Janya and Janaka appears. Father and child. So now all the title holders have become Janaka ragas. And all the other ragas within the basket become Janya ragas. So from this raga came that raga. This is all just mumbo jumbo nonsense. I'm going to call it out exactly what it is. It is nonsense. Because actually this raga never came from there. Some may have, I will come to those. But it didn't work that way. The system didn't work that way. So the moment I said I can construct scales, I can construct many more scales, remember. Some of those constructions came from this process. For example, for me to say a raga like Begada comes from either Shankarabharanam or anything is beyond superficial. Which means you don't know Begada, you don't know Shankarabharanam. Only then you can think those two are connected in some father-son relationship. We will leave the patriarchy out of it for now. But, so I want to give you this chart of history to understand the complexity in our head. These are embedded in our head. You may not know it, but in your learning, it's embedded in us. So now, where is the raga? Becomes almost such a confusing question, right? So let me look at 2 kinds of ragas that have come in for me to explain a bit more And then look at what an identity is. May I ask you to do something? I'll tell you. We'll sing something later on this. So, if you look at old ragas that I would call organic ragas, many other scholars also use that term, the first thing you figure from those ragas is the identity of that raga is established very fast for those who know it. How that's established is also interesting, but come to it. In the sense, I just need to sing one part of the entire idea and you know what it is. Okay? These are characteristics of all organic ragas, old ragas. I don't need to show you the entire bandwidth, the entire span. You just know it from there. In constructed ragas, never works. You have to constantly be showing everybody where everything exists. So my job 70% of the time is to be like a trapeze artist. To go up and down and say, look, this note is still there, it's not the other one. This note is still there, it's not the other one. The reason is, when a raga comes from phraseological connections or melodic atoms that kind of talk to each other, then you can identify, by looking at the texture of atom 1, you can identify what the others will be. But if it comes from an idea of no, there is absolutely no such relationship, it is arbitrary things picked up and put together, I have to constantly tell you, that's not arbitrary, that's still here. Don't think I'm wandering somewhere else. So some of these constructed ragas or synthetic ragas do this. I will give an example for them. Any linear. I'll take questions at the end if that's okay. Now her entire alapana, she'll has to constantly keep telling you this story. If I don't go to knee too often, hypothetically. If I keep playing there, it could be the other knee. So I have to tell you, no, it's not that. So the entire raga span, if you notice in any alapana by any musician, after a point there'll always be a sweep. They will sing at a one range and then there'll be one sweep to tell you all this exists, go to another range, another full sweep. Because there's no other choice. I have to constantly remind, which means there's one interesting thing not happening. The first thing that you do, first thing that needs to happen with the raga is that we are all convinced of the illusion. In these ragas, you're never convinced of the illusion. I am also not convinced of the illusion. The beauty of raga is the first job, they always tell you when you sing a raga, people should know what it is. Whatever that means. But what they actually mean is that both of us are in that illusion that's being created. The moment we are convinced of that illusion, doesn't matter what I sing, you'll still hear it. Which is why that Ananda Bhairavi was still Ananda Bhairavi. Because I was convinced of that illusion, you are convinced of that illusion. And the moment you're convinced of it, anything I sing, it still has that sonic body, or what I would call the oral scape of that raga. Okay? So, in the older ragas, that's why I can stop singing now and sing a song. Everybody who knows what it is knows it's Begada. I can never do that with Vachaspati. I can never do it. Right? So this textural difference has to be understood. between a constructed linear scale, which we call a raga, and an organically evolved idea, which is a raga. You have to understand this difference. Again, this is not about what you like, it's not about enjoyment. This is a academic conversation. It doesn't take into account whether you draw pleasure from it. Please draw pleasure from it. I draw pleasure from it too. But it doesn't change the analysis of what we are looking at or how we need to conceptually think of it. Right? And doesn't make it lesser. It just makes it a very different basket of things or category of things. Maybe it needs a different kind of a categorization itself. That's my argument, that it needs a different set of categorization. And don't mix it with this. Then what happens is, the moment you create linear scales, you can create scales without one note, without two notes. You can jumble it also. The jumbles are interesting, and I'll tell you why they're interesting in a bit. The ones that you remove one note or the two, you could have 5-note scales, you could have 6-note scales. The 5-note scales, Mohanam is the most common. Sariga pada sada pari sada pada ga sariga. Okay? Now the 6-note are actually a little more interesting than we think. Even the 5-note, for example, here also we have done something odd. Take Hindolam, for example. Ni ni da ma ga sa ya da ni sa ga ma da ni sa ga ma sa da ma ga ma ni da ma ga ma sa da ni su. Now this is what we understand as Hindolam. But interestingly, if you actually analyze old compositions, they don't treat it as sa ga ma da ni su. They don't treat it. Sa ma ga ma ni da is how they treat it. Ma ga ma ni da ga ma sa. Now it's a different body. Ma ga ni da ni da ni ga sa da ni ma ni da ni ga ma sa ga sa. Now there has been a reductionism on our part even there. Even a scale has sometimes been given a movement that is slightly turned to allow it for maybe an extra possibility instead of getting stuck in linearity. And we have now turned that also. Saga ma da ni sa. What is Hindolam? Saga ma da ni sa sa ni da ma ga sa. It's not true if you think carefully. Take Sri Ranjani, for example, a 6-note raga. Ni da ma si. Now, even here, in older compositions, you find the phrase Gagama Nidama Magama Nidani is what it's approached. Gamadani is there. I'm not saying it's not there. But the approach generally is Sariga Magama Nidani Sa Sanida Magariga Mariga Sarini Sa. Now, this is actually Sri Ranjani. You hear Sri Ranjani in this. Maga Mariga Sarini Sariga Maga Manida Niga Magariga Sarida Nisa. This is more Sri Ranjani than Sariga Madanisa Sanida Magarisa. Is not Sri Ranjani. So, even in a constructed artificial scalular operation, there has been attempts to make it slightly more abstract by convoluting the approach. Now, the question you can ask is, how does convoluting the approach make something abstract? That's the interesting part. The more you don't go linear, you create gaps in between. The gaps means vagaries. Now, the moment Maga Mani Da. Now, the moment I've said it's Maga Mani Da, I know two things. Ma is stronger, Ga is weak. Da is stronger, Ni is weak. Okay? Maga Mani Da means I could also do Maga Ni Da Sa Ni Da. I can sing Dasa Ni Da. I will not have to go Dani Sa Ni Da every time like a madman. Because it says Gama Dani Sa. I can't go Dasa. That's nonsense. It doesn't become another raga immediately. And it's all there, and all this information is there for you if you want to look at it. Ma ga ma ni da sa ni sa ni da. It's still Sriranjan in your ears. Ga ni da ga ma ri ga sa. You just need to know 10 good compositions and you'll get these phrases. Ma ga ma ri ga sa. But the problem is, even when you know that composition, when you sing a raga alapana, you sing it like this. Ma ga ma ri ga sa. You can sing a full Sriranjani alapana with ta da ra 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 ra. It's Sriranjani immediately. So please understand, if you want to abstract something, the one thing you can't do is be literal. 1. 2, you can't be linear. That's the beauty of abstraction. And I generally explain abstraction in the simplest form. This is a pencil falling down. The idea of falling down is abstraction. This is a pencil falling down, but the idea of something falling down is abstraction. So the pencil is irrelevant. And that's what abstraction does. It captures the feeling of falling. And for that to do that, you have to forget the literal, which is the pencil. If you constantly remember that on 16th of October at 6 p.m. at the Academy of Medicine, Mr. Krishna dropped a pencil and it fell at a certain degree, at a certain velocity, that's not abstraction. But if you say, this gave me the idea of what it means to fall, then the falling remains in all your experiences. That's what turning a phrase allows you to do. It's profoundly beautiful. So the moment you allow for that gap, you don't have to worry about sarigama dhanisa, because that's the obvious. Nothing exists in that. It's empty. Just like you remembering this pencil is empty. But if you know what it meant to fall, then you can do something with it. You can fall in different ways. This is what does when you take linearity out of something. Then you get to see a perspective in a manner that you'll never get before. Right? It's so beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Profoundly beautiful. Yeah, I just wish we could think like this about life, but anyway. So, back to music. So I'm just going to move on a bit. Like I said, I'm just touching themes here and there. But despite all this, you could ask a very, very fundamental question. What holds a raga together? Okay, I understand this. I understand you saying there are phrases, there are swaras which have gamakas automatically in them. There is a fundamental swarasthana. All this I understand the history, I understand the mechanics. But what is it that holds it together? Right? Now, it's human beings who do it. Ragas by itself do nothing. So I would like to look at it in try to separate the holding together in 3 spaces. The psychological and emotional and historical. Okay? And this is only for understanding. I'm not categorizing them into 3 things. The psychological comes from association. Right? For example, when I sang that one phrase in Begada, all of you knew it was Begada. Now, for a person who didn't know Begada, what was the experience at that moment? Have you ever asked that question? There was an experience. There's an experience. But your experience is Begada. Person who didn't know it was Begada, there was no raga. The raga did not exist. Isn't that fascinating? There could be people in this auditorium for whom the raga just did not exist. But there were people in the auditorium for whom it was Begada. Is the raga true or false? It's an interesting question. Is it true or false? Right? So the whole point is that you have made it true through your psychological habituation of it. But it's not just psychological, because you also did, that's emotional. I'm not separating the psychology from the emotion. So the technical people, I'm not making that separation. I'm just using it for understanding. The number of things I have to cover, my God, nowadays. Anyway. But that came, was an emotional trigger. Right? Now, that again cannot be decoupled from your perception of Begada. But at the same time, it's possible that when somebody else sang it, you just understood it was Begada but didn't feel that. You get it? So you may at one point somebody said, Begada. Now there is, Now there are two things that are happening. You're responding to your psychological conditioning of knowing it's Begada, and you're also saying, wow. Okay? Now there's a third thing to all this, which is an inbuilt historicity that is being passed on through community. Okay? A historicity, you may not know the technical details, but there's a historicity that comes to it. Right? In that historicity could be a composition, could be your grandmother sang something, could be anything, you know. So the raga happens only when all these factors somehow are coming together. Right? So the raga is a creation of psychology, historicity, emotional connectivity, ultimately conditioning of different types. If that's not there, the raga does not exist. So raga is not some universal being in the world. So let's not talk about that ever in that manner. It's specific to your conditioning. If you're not conditioned, raga is just a word. So sometimes when people tell me, please tell me the raga before saying, see, knowing the name is not going to change the experience actually. It's amazing, but we want to know the name. It happened yesterday at the concert, and I said, do you want me to announce? And they said, please announce the raga name. And I said, if I announce it, what happens? If you know it anyway. And if you didn't know it, me giving you the name should not make a difference. This is a simple logic. But we want to know the name. Because then you want to Google and find out what notes are there in it. Of course, that's a problem. That's a different issue. But you know what actually happens? You never get involved in that experience. Actually what you do is you never give yourself a chance to be emotionally and psychologically invested. To make sure the raga is created in you. Please remember, everyone creates the raga within themselves. We are just catalysts of that possibility. If you don't participate in it, the raga is dead. And that's my only relationship with you, not your applause. This is my relationship with you. Is that we share in this possibility of evoking something. In this case, raga experience. That's what we are doing together. And we're all together saying, wow. That's what we're doing. So it's important to understand that we give it identity. It is not given by forefathers that is passed on to you. It's you and I as active, emotional creatures who are actually giving it body. And we are the ones who can move it beyond all the limitations that we discussed theoretically before. Okay? Wow, 6:10. Okay. Maybe I'll stop here, take a set of questions, maybe 2 or 3, and then go to the next segment. Is there any questions now? I can just move on. Yes.
So we just talked about ragas that are organic versus that came from the extraction of
Yeah, constructed. Yeah.
Is it possible that, because the ragas that we call organic because there are a lot more kritis and we've experienced it.
It's statistically wrong.
No?
Statistically wrong.
Okay. So Bhairavi or Begada, right? Same as there are how many kritis are
So it's not, it doesn't work that way. For example, there are ragas in which there are very limited compositions also. Manji, Ghanta. How many are there? That's one. There's another point here. Now, if you have many compositions, does it mean the raga becomes organic? Now, the whole idea of a raga being better because it has many compositions or can be sung for a longer time is nonsense. Organic, see, we are now trying to go back and see how something maybe came about. Now, how am I doing it? I'm doing that with the data I have in front of me. What data do I have? Is the construction of the raga and the characteristics that we shared. And we all agreed in. That you're able to see something in a raga like that. You can't see that in certain types. It's not a question of exploration. It's a question of the complex creation. The organic raga automatically is non-linear. There is no old raga that is linear. There's never an old raga that is linear. You may ask me whether Shankarabharam is linear. I'm going to say, no, it's not linear. And I can tell you why it's not linear. You've constructed a linear scale for it. But I can sing an entire Shankarabharanam without going Sarigama Padanisa at all. In fact, Shankarabharanam, there is no operation from Pa to Sa. Gama, Sarigama, Pa. Ask anybody to play Alapana and Shankarabharanam after Pa. You'll have to go to Sa. Dani has no positionality. But we say Padanisa. Only a fool will sing Padanisa like that in Shankarabharanam. Sa, Sa, Da, Pa is very rare. Sa, Pa is what Shankarabharanam is. Is that linear or non? Interesting question. Sa, Pa, Ma, Ga, Ma, Re, Sa. My guru, Shamguru Srinivasa, used to do something amazing. He used to say, you know what the scale of Shankarabharanam is? Sa, Re, Ga, Ma, Pa, Da, Ni, Sa, Pa, Re, Sa. Just brilliant. Such a brilliant mind. He said, Sa, Pa, Re, Sa. Cannot be any other ragam. Sa, Pa, Re, Sa. Can't be any other ragam. It can only be Shankarabharanam. So the idea is old ragas are always complex in their movements. Why are they organic? Why am I calling it organic? They seem to have, I kept using the word seem because we don't know. They seem to have come from collective phrases, which is why they are always meshing and going in and out around them, which also means allows me to push them even more. I can find an extra gap somewhere else. I'll give you another example to answer a question, which you will need to help me. I'm very bad at this, so you have to help me. Just play any scale, any two phrases in any linear scale. Any linear scale, then I'll ask you to keep shifting one note with the same phrase. The experiment is being done to prove to you that every time we shift that note, it will still sound like the next ragam. The phrase is the same in these 5 ragams. You can never do that in an organic raga. Anything. One more phrase. Just one more phrase. Okay. Pamagarisa, gagarisa da. Change one note from it. Change one more note. There's no identity here. She just changed one note, it becomes another raga. You can never do this in a Kamboji, in a Begada, in an Ananda Bhairavi, in a Ritigoda. Never going to happen. Because this is just a very simple switch of note position. So what is identity of Shanmuga Priya? So I actually say, all you guys are techies, you should do this. Take any entire alapana of a Shanmuga Priya Simendrudyam. Just change one note on it and listen, send it to somebody and ask them what raga it is. If they detect that you've actually manipulated Shanmuga Priya, I'll put a wager they will never do it. They will think it is Simendra Madhyam. You shift the knee, send the entire file, they say, oh, who played this beautiful Simendra Madhyam? Because Shanmuga Priya, they don't have anything that is their own. That's the basic difference. You can't find it. You just cannot find it. And she can play an entire alapana like this if she wants, with the same phrases in every one of those ragas. And one day it can be raga X, second day it will be raga Y. All will sound good and sound like the respective scales. That's a very intrinsic difference. So the extent or the length of a alapana is not my concern. Just because you can sing a long alapana does not mean the raga is a raga that is organic or synthetic. Either way. You can't say that. Right? Any one more question? I'll take one more. Can I take that? I'll come later? Okay. No, him. Sorry.
So something that I've heard is that different ragams have specific padakramanas associated with them.
Do you have any speeds?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wondering if that is like an intrinsically true or false thing.
Okay.
Whether like where the origin of that idea.
Okay, I think there are, I wouldn't say it's true of all ragas, no. But there are certain ragas that do have More than Kala Pramana, I would say Kala Pramana, for those who don't understand the technical term, the speed, or actually the gait is probably the better word. But there are, that's determined by the texture of movement in the raga. If the raga has rigid texture or tight movements, then the chances that that raga is slightly at a faster gait is more. If it has both, say, rigid, tighter movements and, say, languorous movements, then its flexibility is far more. If it's only languorous movements, then it's probably going to be slightly slower. But these are all bandwidths. There's no absolutisms here. Be very careful with this. No absolutism. There's a bandwidth of languorousness. There's a bandwidth of fastness. So it's within that we operate. But certain ragas do, for example, Neelambari is a languorous raga. But you can ask, we sing one song, Mamava Madhava Deva. We sing it fast. Good question. I don't have an answer for that. But if you ask me, Neelambari is slightly on the slower side. That's because of the texture of the movement. So what determines is, what is the texture of the movement within the raga idea that allows for either pushing the pace without affecting its identity, or retarding the pace without affecting its identity. So when a raga allows you to either retard the pace or accelerate without the identity crumbling, then its bandwidth of gait is greater. Simple as that. Now, each one needs to understand and learn that. And we could argue on few ragas. You may say that one thing has greater flexibility. I may say it has less. There's no right or wrong in this. We just have to live with our differences. Okay? Okay, one question, then I'll move on. Yeah.
Sir, we spoke about the emotional connect of the raga, the art with how they're flowing. Now, my question is how a raga is related to nature. We have seen, there are classifications like morning raga, evening raga, and we have also in the history books, we have seen that an artist sings and rain comes when he sings like raga, like Akkarai Subhalakshmi or something. How is the relationship of a raga with nature, and how does the
You're asking me both nature question and mystical questions. The latter is very difficult to address. If you believe it rained when somebody sang, believe it. Very simple. Just believe it. And to me, it's immaterial. I'll tell you why. I like to look at it slightly more abstractively. Maybe it rained, okay? Or maybe when Tansen sang Deep, the light burned. Maybe it did, okay? Well, I honestly don't believe, but anyway. But say it did. My question is that relevant? Let's think about that. And this morning, afternoon, evening, that's also a very interesting thing to think about, because you have an entire series of paintings. The Ragamala paintings are there, where you have associations of time and raga. Now, I'd like to interpret it slightly differently. I'd like to say that certain ragas, in certain people's interpretations, evoked a sense of morning. Does that mean it should be only sung in the morning? That's a secondary question. You could feel a sense of morning at 6 p.m. So let's not get literal with that, is my argument. Fine, I'm willing to say that you feel Bhupalam gives you a feeling of the morning. Fine. And maybe we're so habituated of seeing it constantly in the morning, or this sun rising and these ragas coming. We are also kind of conditioned to it. Fine, let's say even conditioned. But my point is, it doesn't mean I have to only sing it at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's kind of silly. My point is, can you evoke that feeling of that morning? It doesn't matter when you sing it. I think there's something even that gives a possibility for human endeavor, which is, I think, slightly more nuanced than me just dumbing you down and say, it's anyway morning, you're going to feel it. Right? That's not going to happen, right? If you know it's a morning raga and you say, oh, it felt like morning. Unless I'm a crappy singer, which means I should not be singing. But if you can push that a bit, I think there is something there. There is something there. Now, again, did it rain? Does it matter? If it gives you the feeling of rain, leave it. Just leave it. If it happened to rain, well and good. If it didn't rain, so what? It doesn't make the composer lesser. It doesn't make the experience lesser. It doesn't. Both are still profound. I think that when you are stuck with the fact by saying, oh, when he sang it rained, we have actually lessened the composer there. Because imagine if the composer gave everybody the feeling of rain when actually no droplet fell. Wow. That's genius. And you could call that God if you want. No objections. Right? There's something there that if all of us felt the heat in this room because somebody sang something. And there was no lamp but. I mean, how beautiful is that? I tend to go in that direction. That's where I go. So now, so also, since you asked this association of emotional, I'm just going to say that and move on, is that we also make this very direct, we were talking about this the other day also, direct association. Some ragas are sad, some are happy, some are vigorous, some are, all these are quite silly. Because there are enough examples to counter-indicate them. Even by composers, great composers. Now, one example that I often use is this, two examples I use, is Mukhari, Raga Mukhari. Mukhari, everybody is crying. This is a standard status quo. In fact, in Tamil, they call it Azhuga Ragam, which means it's a ragam of crying. Now, because there are songs that are not really sad, but shall we say, there's a tinge of pathos in them. Now, Yanta ninnevar nintunu shabari bhagya nintunu shabari bhagya menta ninnevar nintunu. One. Another sad. Why is it sad? Because the text is sad. So you've associated the textual meaning with the raga in this case. Let's give another example of the same thing happening. Yandraika Shiva Kripai Varumo Yandraika Shiva Kripai Varumo Yanmana Sanchalam Aarumo Yandraika. So, but then there's a contrast here. Now, you have a Tyagaraja Kirtanam. Karu. The start is like boom. And he is describing a city. Now there's nothing sad about this. It's like he's describing this majestic city. Saketa Nagarini. Now, how do you accommodate this? So let's not make this. Let's look at the opposite example. If I sing Athana, everybody will say Athana is like real, like strong, slap on your face, going for war kind of thing, right? And Tyagaraja comes and sings this song, Ye Papa Mujhe Sitira. What sins did I do? Ye Papa Mujhe Sitira Ramaye. Now, Tadarala Rala Rina Tadarana na na can sing an entire alapana of Athana like this. This is not normal Athana. No, there's nothing aggressive about this, right? So another thing, how do we make these, I'm just putting this out, how do we make association with aggression of being a certain tonality, sensitivity automatically being something soft? There are many problems with these associations. There are many issues with it. Of course, sociological issues and aesthetic issues with it. Because we're making these associations without any thought whatsoever, right? So, why would you have Tyagaraja compose Ye Paap Mujhe Sitra in Athana? He could always take Bukhari, right? So, I'm just saying to also just connect to what you said about emotional. I think these direct connections are habits because maybe certain compositions became popular and their popularity also induces certain feeling. It's possible. All I'm saying is let's not get stuck by it. Let's not think this should mean something. For example, playing soft always or singing soft always is not a sensitive thing to do. Now, if I sang, or if all of us went, may sound beautiful. It's not just the textual meaning, it's just the approach. The start is at the top octave re, it's like opening that door there. Karu. I mean, that's the majesty of that tone. Right? So these are many things you have to think of, rather feel, when you learn a composition or when you practice it again and again and again. Now, to the next step of this entire discussion is, what are we doing? Right? Okay, we know this. We had the discussion about emotionality, about raga construction, raga history to some extent, and looking at how we create these things. So, but this whole idea of creativity, right? Or the word manodharma, which is very difficult to translate literally. Improv doesn't really work, but nevertheless, we could probably use improvisation for English. What are we actually doing here? So when I say there is a creative input or somebody is very creative, what do we really mean? What do we really mean? When am I creative? Am I singing something that's never heard before? Does that mean that? Does that mean that I've brought phrases that never had happened before? It could, but could it mean that? So when is something new is a very interesting question. Now, if you actually see what happens in most manodharma processes, is what I will call is reorganization, rearrangement. So we have, say I know raga X. I know so much about it. What I'm actually doing, what my mind is doing is probably at one level, just shifting its angles. The phrase may be the same. I'll give you an example for that. So we can debate whether that's new. It's an interesting debate. Suppose I'm going to sing, take any raga. Very good. Stop. What's the next phrase? Okay, we both knew it. Now, we both knew that's happening. Now, is that creative or not? Interesting question. Okay, I'll come to that because I think there is a nuance in that. Now, but there's another thing. What did I do now? I flipped the two phrases. You didn't even know I did it. I'll tell you what I did. The first phrase was
ta-ra-ra-ra-la. Second was ta-ra-ra. Now I did ta-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra-ri. You never know I did it. I did it right in front of your eyes. This is a very simplistic example. It's far more nuanced. And there's something else I did in the operation is I changed the tone of one note there to fit the reverse. Right? Now, a lot of times we are doing this shadow. So one thing about art is there's always the obvious and there's always the shadow, which is whether it's visual art or sculpture or anything. So a lot of times we are playing with the obvious and the not so obvious. And there has to be the obvious for the not so obvious to exist. Right? Now the question is this, which am I moving to foreground, which am I moving to back, to hiding it? And if there are more than 2 variables, if there are about 15 variables, then they're also laterally moving, right? They're not just moving, horizontally, they're also laterally moving. The moment they can move this way and this way, magic can happen. A man who's standing on earth could be standing on moon. If it is a picture, imagine if it's a picture and you can move it horizontally, laterally and this way and frontally, then you can have everything moving. This is exactly what we're doing. So we have so many variables and we are moving it in all directions. Now the moment we're moving it, we can't literally just place it. Right? So we're also making little adjustments to its appropriateness in its new position. This is creativity. This is what we're doing. Now, but something else happens here. While doing this, we stumble upon ways to connect these knowns that we never knew before. Just like I realize that I've never sung this phrase before, by the way. I've never sung these 2 phrases together in my life together like this, in my memory. But I suddenly realized if I have to I stumbled upon something there. Then what do? That's your anchor. I'm giving you the known back because you're comfortable then. So too much of discomfort, then you're lost. So I said, don't worry, you're in safe zone. I'll give you something hold on to it quickly. That's exactly what I'm doing. That's exactly what I'm doing. So I have stumbled upon that way of using one note now, which I didn't stumble upon before. So when you move something, you're not just moving that, but you're also suddenly seeing something which you never saw before. Creativity exists in the openness to be able to observe something you did not observe before. Period. That's it. And that's all I teach my students. I tell my students, my job is simple. If I teach you how to listen and see, I'm irrelevant after that. I'm irrelevant. Because that's all my job is, to push you to a point where you're so open that requires a ridiculous amount of vulnerability in the person. Because I will foreground what I know very quickly. But to see what I don't know, I must be willing to remain in a position of saying, I don't know. That's hard for an artist to do. For anybody, but artists on stage, definitely more. So, I stumble upon connectivities. I stumble on possibilities. This is one. So, I've given you 2 things happening. There is also one very basic operation, which is even something that has been sung 100 times, suddenly one day makes you tear up. One phrase. The same phrase may be heard by 100 musicians. Or I may have sung it 40 times. It's only the 32nd time that you cried. It's the same phrase. I could notate it. But what happened on that 32nd moment? That's creativity. That's new. Newness is about the newness of the moment, not the newness of the construction. That moment that is created
is new. And by new, I'm using in a slightly more deeper sense than something you've not seen. Slightly deeper sense. So this is what we are actually doing. Oh, whoops. Okay. So now, so when we sing an alapana, I showed you some alapanas. Now let's look at a few other things, and then I have few more other points to make, and we'll wrap and take some questions. But it's not just about an alapana, it's even in a composition. Now another thing is we always told, for example, that you learn from compositions. You learn about a raga from compositions. But nobody tells us how to learn from it. They just tell us maybe sing it in Akara. This is all okay for ABCD level. But then what do you mean? What am I learning? Actually, we're not learning. I'll show you why. Ragas Kamboji. Take another composition. Shri Subramanyaya Namaste Namaste Shri Subramanyaya. Now it's very unusual. Whenever we sing this ragam, na ra ra la 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 ra la 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 na. This is a template. Now we have these two majestic compositions that are starting at the lower octave. We never sing Kamboji at the lower octave. We never sing it. So what are we learning? Tadari We never sing Kamboji here. We want to quickly go and shout. Now, two magnus opus compositions are opening at the base and just opening this entire floor open for you. Shri Su, and such simple. Shri Su It's over. The raga is over there. The story is closed. So what are we learning when we say? So we have to rethink these little statements of convenience. So if I'm going to learn from a composition, first, the question is also, is the student or the artist being able to see these things? The other thing is also textural. Tadari, re, re, This is not a natural singing of Kamboji. So when we say we want to learn from compositions, let's think hard about it. Just like I sang Atana and showed you, a complete new texture of Atana can appear from Ye Papunje Sitra. It's not just a phrase, it's also the tonality. Please remember, the tonality of what you sing or the timbre with which you sing is very important. It's very important part of this. Right? So these, when we say we are, another thing, what we learn from different types of compositions are different things. Because the construction of a raga within a framework of a composition form changes if the compositional form changes. So if I have a varnam in Kamboji, the treatment of that movement in that varnam, of Kamboji in that varnam, is entirely different from how the texture of that Kamboji is in a kirtana, vis-a-vis a texture in a javali, vis-a-vis a texture in a tillana. Have I understood different Kambojis? Answer is 90% no. You just pick known phrase and say, oh, I learned this phrase, I'll repeat this phrase, I will sing this here. No, that's very silly. Right? Does not have mind in it. So we have to think deeply when we say composition. Also remember, compositions learn from the creativity of the musician also. Let's not forget it's a cyclical movement. It is not a one-way traffic. So when musicians are singing and bring out phrases within those gaps in ways that were not there before, then the composition may evolve, which allows for that gap to be documented in a composition. And then that feeds off another creative spree. That again feeds off another composition. So it's like this circular movement that is happening. So I want to make this point. What happens if I was going to do a different kind of manodharma? Now, I'll stop in about 5 and then we can take questions. So I'll take the same raga. So, Bhu Loka Vaikuntham. Itigani Bhuloka Vaikuntham Itigani Bhuloka. Now here, this line also gives you an opportunity to hang around a note that I usually will not. Loka Vaikuntham Iti Ganibhu Loka Iti Vaikuntham Iti Ganibhu. So once I'm doing this, I need to internalize the melodic line itself. Now, what we generally do is we use the melodic line as a coat stand. And on it we dump everything we want. No, it's not a coat stand. It's a moving body of melody. Your job is to dive into it. When I say, so when you say you know a composition, you don't know it. You've by-hearted it. You don't know it. Bhuloka Vaikuntham Iti Ganibhu
Vaikuntham iti yani bhu. Now, this is what you do. You get into that entire melodic frame that is given to you. And you just allow the frame to move. If the artist can allow the frame to move, music will happen. If the artist wants the frame to move, music will not happen. You may sing good stuff and get an applause. That's irrelevant. I'm talking about music today. Okay? But when you allow it to move, then it finds its way. And it finds its way because you're watching. Bhulaka Vaikuntham iti yani bhulaka. Vale. Now, if I take another line which is approximately the same range, the moment I do that, the statement is out there differently. Now, there I won't be singing. I can. But if I want to get there, I need to first get into it and find a way here. Bhakta Paradi Nuda Nutsu Parama Bhakta Paradi Nuda Nutsu Parama. Now say I want to go where I want to go. Watch. Nuda Nutsu Parama Bhagata Paradi Nuda Nutsu Parama Bhagata Paradi Nuda Nutsu Parama. So, there is process, and process is not a bad word in art. But because process does not mean it's regimented, it does not mean it is pre-constructed. It means that you're going from, you want to go from point A to point B, you're finding the most, I don't want to use the word, that's a technical word, but the most beautiful way, actually most efficient way is the right word actually. But actually finding the most beautiful way to get there, therefore the transition for you, not for you, for me, is there. So this is what raga experience is. This is how you have different colors for Kamboji. If I don't do this, I will sing one template which is beautiful all my life. I mean, we can all do it. All of us on stage can do it. But then at some point you must recognize that what you're singing is not raga music. It actually is not, because you have never actually seen it, never heard it. The moment you hear it like this, then grammar becomes a moot point. That is why I could sing Ananda Bhairavi the way I sang. I didn't have to even think. I didn't think. It was entirely Ananda Bhairavi. There was not a moment when it was Ananda Bhairavi. I know music well enough to definitely say that with some confidence. But did it follow the scale? No, it did not. Is it wrong? Your call. I don't think it is. That's my opinion. Because raga moves. The raga needs to move. If we are only going to do what happened 200 years ago, you and I are useless creatures. We have to do something here, and we have to do it with humility. Not to the 200 years, humility to the music. That's the only thing that matters. Nobody else matters. Time doesn't matter. Thank you very much. Take questions now. There was, okay, so, you have not asked the question. You can go. Ooh. You know, answering that question is, sit down. Answering the question is very tricky. It seems like I figured out something or something. It kind of feels very odd answering. You know what I mean, right? It kind of puts me in a kind of a, anyway, weird spot. Okay, the question was, if I can paraphrase you, the question was saying this kind of thought process. How does one inculcate it? How did it come to you? Did it come like that? You know, so I said it's tough to answer that question because it's an awkward question for me to answer. I can say one thing. Maybe the issue is not at all got to do with music. Okay? So what we are actually talking about is something which is not necessarily only about music, right? So what I could say is that the environment in which I grew up definitely played a huge role. But I think that this being conscious or acutely conscious of yourself, right? Of the way you think or the way you feel or the way you respond is something that has always been part of my life. And I think that has helped in having a mirror in front of me, right? And all we are discussing is vulnerability in a positive sense. That is, can you be vulnerable? Because only when you're vulnerable are you able to receive. Otherwise, you can't receive. And everything I'm talking about is being able to receive the music, being able to listen to it, being able to respond to it, right? So maybe it's got to do with developing that quality in some manner of being able to receive it. And then you can swim with it. Then many other things start appearing. And in music, it's the same, right? It's not like I heard all this before, like from childhood. Let's be very clear with that. Okay? I went through the rigmarole like everybody else. I sang music like everybody else in many ways. I was as ambitious, as avaricious as everybody else. At that point in time, you're not thinking all this. You're a performer. I'm out there to just make you happy, get the applause, of course. But I think there was these things always lingering. And when I saw things in music, I realized one thing, that when I saw something interesting in music, I had very little to do with it. In the sense, it was not something I commanded, right? And that was interesting for me. It's like, how the hell is that possible? Right? So then things start opening. Then the raga perspective changes. Of course, I did a lot of work. I wanted to understand the raga history. I studied musicology. This is not just philosophical mumbo-jumbo. I studied musicology. I went into old treatises. I looked at raga history. I was curious about it because everybody told me everything is so old, it's pristine, it's coming to you and all this. And I said, is that true? And you know the answer to that question. And what is this oldness about it? What is this I'm carrying forward? Am I carrying forward anything, truthfully? Right? So I did that very basic work also to understand. But parallel with that, it opened doors. Understanding that and being able to look at these things in the manner opened doors to sounds I never heard, to the way I could articulate that I never articulated in music. Right? And then the movements were they were like, almost like obvious. They're standing in front of me. Right? It was never obvious before. Now it's right there. I'm like, so always in class, sometimes I'm sitting with my students and they're saying something and I can see something and the student doesn't see it. Like, can't you see that damn thing? It's standing in front of you. What are you doing? And I stop and say, look, it's there.
So that's the whole thing. Can you see it? And maybe somebody else can see something else, but can they see? Is the question. So I think that's a longer process, but I really think it's got to do with our attitude with ourselves. And I think if that changes at least by a little bit, it manifests itself in music automatically. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. You raised your hand even before, so I'll come to you. Yeah.
Let me first say that I am rather illiterate person, but every word you said was musical. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So, my question was, as a kid, the impact I had from a movie called Shankara
Yeah.
was a scene where the girl sings something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and the dad says Shaga, and that appeared a big impact on me. And I asked my grandmother, and she said she sang a note wrong. Going by what you're saying, she must have sung a different raga.
I don't remember that scene exactly. It could have been okay, this is actually, wow, you're opening a Pandora's box of a question. Deeply philosophical question, I must tell you. Whoa. So your question is what? Did she sing a different raga? Okay, I'll go back and see the scene and answer the question. I don't want to put my foot in mouth.
My question was actually, can a singer go from one raga to another using his creativity and not be bound by one single raga?
You want to answer that question? Please, I'm talking too much. There you go. Please answer. Can a musician go from one raga to another using their creativity?
Well, if you would ask me, would probably change ragas but not deviate from that raga because the system actually tells you that, you have to be bound.
You answer, look at me.
Yeah. So if I'm singing Raga Shankarabharanam, I have to definitely be in Raga Shankarabharanam.
You get what he's saying? She's saying that if you sing Shankarabharanam, you're singing Shankarabharanam. Now, if you want to go from Shankarabharanam somewhere else, you must have the intention to go from Shankarabharanam to somewhere else. Am I right?
Yeah, correct.
You can't say, I went somewhere else. Oh, no, I'm not going. You can't just, you get what I'm saying? So basically, if you're singing Shankarabharanam, you can sing what you want as long as it's Shankarabharanam. Now, you can't accidentally just find yourself somewhere else and say, no, I was just moving in that direction. You guys didn't figure it. That's a bit cop-out is what she's saying. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So, if you want to move, you can. Well, she can move and show you also. You want to? So, we can do it. Both of us can do it. Let's do 5 ragas. We just move from one raga to another and show you. Quickly. So, now yeah. So exactly the point. So I said that right in the beginning. If you don't know, if you're not invested in that illusion, this is irrelevant to you. Now, whether you want to make that relevant or not is your choice, not mine. So to you, it's irrelevant, right? But to a person who's invested in the illusion, it's relevant. If you're all consumed by the idea that it is Shankarabharanam, it is relevant that it is not the technical frame of Shankarabharanam, that the sound of Shankarabharanam is still there. It's relevant to the people who know. It's irrelevant to the person who doesn't know. So you shouldn't care. But we can move from one to another.
That particular scene is a very intense scene because she makes a mistake. She sings Samajavatam and then she brings Rishabham, she brings it, and then so the father feels that how can you make such a mistake, and then
Oh, so there's a technical error. Oh my God, if my teacher did that to me every time I made a mistake, I won't have a palm left. Because I don't remember the scene. So, is it such a cardinal error? Like, we do it every day. To put it very simply. All of us do this. Okay? The issue is, you know what? If you don't know you're doing it, that's the problem. If you know you're doing it, it's okay. It happens to all of us. But if, say, you're just singing, you don't even know where you are. So, all that we discuss is also being acutely aware of where you are. You can't not be. So, if I'm saying,
This is Ananda Bhairavi. I went to Kedaragowda. This is Yadukula Kamboji. This is Neelambari. It's Kedaram. I can go on. That's because I know every one of them. And I'm using certain points to make the transition. There is intention here. I'm using something that I know is a commonality and say I can bounce here. So even when you move, you're seeing something and moving. Right? So that needs to be there. You can't... you just get stirred. Don't worry about the ragam. And by the way, if you're not stirred, it's also not a big problem. It's cool not to be stirred. Absolutely cool. Anybody else? Yes. Very good question. Into an abstract form. It's a very good question. This is my opinion. I think ragas that are synthetic but are not linear in construction have hope. Because that's a very important aspect of the non-linear idea. The non-linear idea is where you have gaps. And how you can move from A to B, the probability increases. Right? Sagari ma pa. Now the moment it says sagari ma pa, is it saga ma pa, sari ma pa? I don't know. Now if I say I can go to pa, sagari magari samari sagari ma pa ni pa. Now the moment I convolute its scalular approach, there is an opening. I can definitely say there is an opening. Now, will that get to a point where it breathes like, say, we don't know. But I will say this, a completely linear does not have hope. I'll stick my neck out here today and say it. No, the problem is you will never sing a non-linear phrase. I'll tell you why you will not. You ask anybody who sings a linear raga, they will not sing they will not, because the fear is, by jumping a note, you're shadowing something else. You have to go once, at least regularly on the linear line. So, for example, Simendra Madhyam. Nobody will sing this. I sang saga ma pa da ni da pa ma ga sa ri. Nobody will sing it Simendriam. Ma ga sa ri does not sound like Simendriam. Sa ri ga ma, I have to do it. So you get trapped in the linearity. This is the problem of conditioned linearity. Linearity is not one probability. If linearity is one probability, then we are talking something else. Right? But here it's conditioned linearity. Now the moment I do that, so one thing we could do is try and do this to them. But the problem, I have done it, that's why I'm telling you this. But the problem happens is sometimes it holds, sometimes it will not hold. Because there is no association you're able to make with it. Right? So I would say with the completely linears, I don't see it happening. Because it's also how our brain works. Right?
the moment you give us one set of lines, our brain finds it very difficult to find markers. We are looking for patterns always. We don't find a pattern where we can associate. This is the problem. But in scales that are inbuilt with, say, vakra, as we say, there is definitely a possibility. There's definitely a possibility. And I've played with a few of them, so I know. Definitely a possibility, yeah. Yeah. Oh, same question. Okay. Can I take that question from? Yeah, go ahead. Graha Bedam is a very different conceptual. No, okay, you can sit down. Thank you. Tonic shift, which is what Graha Bedam is, well, that has been debated on both sides. On the raga logic of it, it's important. It's also a very interesting conversation, because Graha Bedam actually destroys the raga logic. Actually does, because it changes the entire movement of every swaram. You have to change it. So are you truly actually shifting tonic? Challenging question. If you kept everything without any movement, then we can make that argument that your shift is perfect. But you're saying this is moving here, but because I've shifted tonic, this will not now move, this will move. You're not moving the same scale, are you? Right? So you're actually making an adjustment over there. Let's first recognize that Graha Bedam or tonic shift is actually a raga adjustment. Okay? You can still love it and do it. That's a different thing. But we have to acknowledge that if you analyze it, there is a certain adjustment. This will not change that. Now, it will not change it very much. But one thing, if you notice, the amount of Graha Bedam you can do in an older raga is far less. Natakurunji gives you some possibilities. A few ragams give you possibilities. But in a scalular raga is where you have maximum scope of doing it, which is, and usually a linear scalular. Sometimes a non-linear happens when they take one phrase out of something and shift it. Natakurunji is a case where you can take a shift, one phrase. But those are far and few in between. So that's what I think. Yeah. You there? Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Huh. Okay, you want to hear? So, the question is actually flipped. Sit down. Actually, you should flip the question. I'll tell you why. When you sing khamas, you will not have a harikamboji problem. If I sing harikamboji like khamas is where the problem will happen. You understand what I'm saying? Because harikamboji is in our mind more straight, in our mind. Khamas is more zigzag. So, this zigzag is going to tell you it's khamas anyway. But if I make this straight like the zigzag, will there be a problem? Are you getting me or no? You're getting me, right? There will be a problem. That's precisely my point. If I sing, what raga is this? Tadarana, 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 la la na. Same swarasthanas of Harikamboji. You will never hear Harikamboji. Right? So this actually highlights the point I was making before. So, though khamas has exactly the same swaras, if I sing all the phrases like khamas and Harikamboji, you're going to say this is not Harikamboji, this is khamas. But if I sing a Harikamboji phrase in khamas, you will not say the same thing. It'll run with it. I sang a Harikamboji phrase here, in between. Just slid it in. But it worked. Thank you for proving my point. Very good question, by the way. Thanks. I'll see if somebody else who's not asked and come to you. Yes, you.
So, you're talking about how some ragas will be shadowed by other ragas, right? So, for these, what we're calling these organic ragas, it seems like they have like a very strong identity. Is it possible for a raga to be one of those weaker ragas that can be overshadowed, but also have that
No. So, though they are strong, there are crossovers always. It's not like there are no crossovers. There's a crossover between Dvijavanti and Yadukla Kamboji. There's a crossover between Manji and Bhairavi. That's one of the classic cases of one actually finishing the other ragam. Bhairavi destroyed Manji. What you hear as Bhairavi today is mostly Manji phrases. Because we changed the Swara position of Bhairavi. And because we did that to Bhairavi, Manji died. So we actually drew out of Manji its identity and gave it all to Bhairavi. You know, Manji does not know what to do. Right? So all these things happen. It's almost like human beings in society, right? In some ways. Yeah. It is exactly the same thing if you think of it, right? So therefore this has happened. But there are crossovers. Now the problem is if you think those crossovers have to be erased. There I have a problem. Some people feel that, certain common phrases, no, don't sing this phrase. No, there is a category for a raga called chaya like a raga. The raga that gives you a chaya of another raga. Or the shadow of another raga, to answer your question. So there are common phrases, and I think those commonalities are important because they also show a certain connectivity with something else. Now, you must know how to use it. How do you use that You can't just plonk it from nowhere and, there. Then it really sits like funny, what the hell happened over there? But you must know how to use that common phrases. For example, there's one phrase in Dvijavanti, in the composition. Some people don't sing it. I know they don't. I'll sing and show you. And my teacher taught me it. Che Balakrishnam Chintita Artha Pradacharana. This is what everybody sings. But actually one Sangati is like this. Chintita Artha Pradacharana. Everybody says that's a Yadukla Kamboji Sangati. Why you sing it? No. It is also a Dvijavanti Sangati. But I should not, when I sing an Alapana, I must know how to use it. I don't sing it from nowhere and suddenly plonk it. I must know Dvijavanti enough to know how that needs to come in. That's artistry. But don't erase it because you don't know what to do with it. That I have a problem with. Because we don't know what to do with it, we erase it. We have done that, by the way, another thing I'd say, many old phrases have been erased because the grammar doesn't fit to our construction today. But those phrases are documents of history. Those are seeds of telling you where it came from. They tell you that this was where it was and this is... So, many times you've done this. And that is, in a way, making a very reductionist idea of the raga. There's no point saying raga is this great thing if you're going to reduce it to something that's very, very limited. And after reducing it, we can't explain it, it's too complicated. That's what we tell people you want to explain raga to, right? We say, no, it's not a scale, it's more than a scale. But we don't know what to say after that. You have to know compositions for it. But what do you mean by more than a scale? We have no answer to that question. Right? So I would say these are all markers that we need to retain. So there is still an overflow, if you want to call that happens between ragas. And there is some beauty to the overflows. Absolutely. Yeah. At the end.
Do I have choice between requesting you to sing Bhagavati?
No, you can't. No request, please.
Okay. Then the question is, at this stage, and this would be to any of you.
Praveen will answer the question. Yeah. He's not. What do you practice?
What do we practice?
Take that mic. Do you practice? He seems to have some doubt about your practice routine, but...
Yeah, we do practice. I mean, like, we just have to keep in touch, and it's like you work out every day, right? So you have your own routine and you work that. But I think the most important thing is to kind of practice to listen, because that's the more complicated part. So to actually listen, because that's something that that's kind of difficult, because you come with your own skill set on stage, and all you want to do is to do that well. But you need to forget that and listen to what else is happening on stage. And that requires not just practice, I think, a different kind of mindset. So that's what I am practicing at the moment, other than like, working my fingers and stuff like that. So that's what I practice.
Please. No, please. I'm tired.
He answered it.
Do you practice?
Well, I did a lot of practice in my childhood days. Now I don't practice that much, and mostly it is just a mental practice that you just try to. So if we feel we are not getting some phrases or some ideas or something, we just work it out in our mind, and that's what it is.
We'll take one last question, maybe. We'll take two. We'll take both yours and finish. Yeah, you first.
I'm not a student of music, but I'm a student of dance. So my question is pertaining to how raga can kind of invoke an emotion, and not necessarily the emotion which it is believed to invoke, which you talked about. So many times we're used to, in dance, we want to depict or communicate a scene. So we follow the pattern. If we want to show grief, we use the typical ragas.
You also do other things. Ra, la, la, is Ganges coming from the sky to the floor, isn't it? It's true, right? Yeah, I know. I've sung. I know exactly. Go ahead.
So my main problem here is we are very used to listening to the same ragas being used
Yeah.
at a particular emotion.
Yeah.
The audience is also very used to that. And how do I, if I'm a researcher, I would test various ragas to find out which is the best, which are the ragas which can invoke. Like that, coming to the music side, how do we test out what are the other ragas?
So, I mean, I think the baseline starting point must be to look at research on the compositions that are there. To start off with. I'm not saying that's the be-all and end-all. Let's start with what information we have. If you look at that information, look at the varnams, and look at the variety of padam, ragams in padams. I mean, erotica is evoked in ragas that I will not even think have anything to do with erotica. Right? And how is that possible? Right? And so padams are very interesting, because you have this very deeply sensual composition in ragas that I don't even associate with that kind of an experience. So I would say first go to that. Go to the varnams and look at the variety of ragas used. And obviously the composer thought that it evoked. And evoking in dance is different from evoking in just music. I'm talking only in, because here you have another stage of abstractive interpretation, which is from the Sahitya, okay, which we probably are not so involved in. But even there, you have an interpretation there. So you don't have to only fall in love in kamas, right? You can fall in love in ghanta. I mean, who would think ghanta is romantic, right? I mean, how could you fall in love in ghanta? I mean, it's crazy. So obviously there is an opening there. So I would say start with that research and look at the palette that you have. What are the different, and since you're in dance, you can look at it in terms of rasa also. But with fluidity, of course, and see how it works. And I think that's a good starting point. And then you can say, okay, once you understand that, then you start pushing boundaries. But without understanding that, you can't do this. One last question, that'll be yours. We also have it. Most teachers don't teach. It's not just your teacher. Your teacher was a good person. You're putting me really on the spot. Because then I have to say your teacher was a bad teacher. Come on, don't let me do that. So it's unfortunately uncommon. I agree with you. And I think that has been one of the problems in Carnatic music, that we should have not taken that direction. There's an interesting history to it. Maybe another day I'll talk about it and why it did not happen Hindustani. Or not Hindustani, Khyal, to be more specific. So that is the problem. what I would say is that we have to, maybe at least at the stage of the Varnams, start talking about what are the identity markers. Now, the only problem there is that you need the teacher to be equipped to know that. Now, this is where we fall into problems. Now, if you have mass production of teachers, then this is not possible. They're going to go the easiest route. And the easiest route is say, Sarigama Padanisa or Sagama Padanisa or Samapa Magadanisa, whatever that is. So there we have a problem there. So what we need is a cultural shift. Both from teachers, from parents, from students, all of them saying, I don't want to be on stage in 3 years. You know, grandparents not taking video and saying, I'm putting on Facebook. I mean, these are all part of the problem. Don't ever remove this from the problem. This is a social problem. Now, why is this happening? Why have we made the most simple, reductionist, stupid way of teaching this music? Because everybody is in a rush to be presented somewhere. Now, you curtail that, then you're willing to say, I will take time to learn. So it's not just the teaching methodology problem. It is. But it's also the pressures that the society has been putting. It's not new, by the way. It's always been there. Now you use a different mode to do it. That's all is the difference. So this all has to change. Are you willing to say that, you may not get on stage for 6 years? Or you may never get on stage. So what? Right? So, I mean, if you're not willing to address this very psychological, like an oppressive mindset that we have created around this music, you're not going to change the method. I don't blame the teachers at some level. Because they are like, I mean, they're forced to do it at some level. I know people are forced to do it. And please also remember, that is their livelihood. So how can you fault them? That's how they live. So I sometimes don't fault them at all. You create a culture that makes them do something and then say they are bad teachers. It's completely unfair. Are you willing to say, no, it's okay? Let my child learn one line for 1 month. Will any parent keep quiet? No parent will keep quiet. Right? So, those are also problems. And methodology is a problem. We need a complete shift in methodology of teaching. I assert that very strongly. And that's not just true of violin or vocals. As true of mridangam also. There needs to be a shift in methodology. Because our methodology is driven by something now. Right? And there is a gap between the music and the performance of it. We have to decide which we want to teach and which we want to learn. And we keep talking about culture. We have to decide which culture we really want. Thank you very much.
Yes, I hope everyone enjoyed that. I didn't introduce myself before, but my name is Karuna. I'm the president of Aarohi, and I would just like to take a minute to acknowledge all the people who made this happen. First of all, thank you very much to the artists for coming all the way to Georgia Tech today and for that lecture demonstration. Thank you very much to Ms. Lakshmi Anand and Ms. Ramya Rajaraman for working with us over the past month and a half to make this all fall into place. I'd also like to thank Aarohi's executive board for all their hard work. I'd especially like to thank our finance chair, Prithvi Ologanathan, for working tirelessly to make this financially possible. And our performances chair, Shreyas Ashok, for making everything go smoothly today. Thank you again to Lakshmi Auntie and the Bharadwaj family for all their hospitality and for taking care of the artist arrangements locally. Thank you to SGA at Georgia Tech and our generous sponsors for making this possible for us as well. And thank you to Venkat Uncle of Venkat Kutuwa Photography for covering the event today. I'd also like to thank the Academy of Medicine and their staff for all their support and for giving us this space for today. And thank you all finally for being here and making it a wonderful event as well. We hope it was a good time. Please feel free if you'd like to come speak with us to learn more about what we do and how you can get involved. But otherwise, I think we'll end with that. Thank you all. Have a good evening.